Years after a mute woman rescued a raven chick, the bird performs an inexplicable feat that defies medicine, becoming the key to unraveling a dark mystery no expert could comprehend. The morning mist still clung to the pine trees when the ambulance burst down the dirt road, shattering the usual silence of the small, isolated property. Inside the house, the body of Elias, Ilara's kind old grandfather, lay inert on the bed, a serene, almost unreal smile still on his lips. But the serenity was only superficial. Elias's death was an enigma, a whisper of malice disguised as a natural passing. Ilara, with her expressive eyes and restless hands, desperately tried to communicate her anguish to the paramedics and soon after to the police. Her voice, stolen by a childhood fever, could not articulate the words that tumbled over each other in her mind. She gestured, pointed to the bedside table where Elias kept his medicine, to the cup of tea she had prepared for him every night. But her movements, interpreted through the veil of tragedy, seemed more confusing than clarifying. The forensic doctors were perplexed. There were no signs of violence, nor pre-existing conditions that would justify such a sudden death. Initial analyses revealed nothing. An unexpected heart failure, one suggested, but the intuition of another, more experienced one, whispered something more sinister. Elias's body, though peaceful, seemed to have been slowly drained of its vitality, like a plant that withers without the cause being noticed. A silent poisoning, undetectable by conventional methods, a shadow creeping between the cells. The police's attention naturally turned to Ilara. She was the sole resident of the house, Elias's primary caregiver. Who else would have constant and unrestricted access? Who else could have administered something so subtle, so imperceptible? The fact that she was mute, unable to defend herself verbally, only intensified the suspicions. Her silence, once a characteristic of her essence, became an insurmountable barrier, a wall of incomprehension that isolated her even further. "Miss Ilara, we understand this is difficult," said Detective Almeida. His voice deep and patient, but his eyes, hard and scrutinizing, did not hide his distrust. "But we need you to cooperate. Your grandfather, he didn't die of natural causes. There are indications of a substance we haven't been able to identify yet, a substance that acted slowly, leaving no obvious traces." Ilara shook her head vigorously, warm tears streaming down her cheeks. She tried to sign, but the pen trembled in her hands. She loved Elias more than anything. He was her family, her safe harbor. The idea of harming him was blasphemy. As the police searched the house, Corvus, the raven with black feathers and intelligent eyes, watched everything from high up on an oak branch. He had been a fragile chick, found by Ilara on the brink of death years ago. She healed him, fed him, and he never left her side. Now Corvus seemed to sense his protector's anguish. He croaked softly, a sound only Ilara understood as comfort, a shared lament. He flew to Ilara's bedroom window, landing on the sill and tapping his beak against the glass, as if to get her attention, to warn her of an invisible danger. But the danger was already there, tangible and cruel. With no other clues, no other suspects, and Ilara's inability to communicate effectively, the formal accusation came as an inevitable blow. Ilara was arrested, taken to the police station, and the world she knew crumbled. The next day, local newspaper headlines screamed about the mystery of the silent poison and mute caregiver accused. Public opinion, fueled by the lack of answers and sensationalism, had already condemned her. Ilara found herself alone, cornered. Her innocence a silent scream in the void. The trial was imminent, and she had no way to prove the truth, unless something or someone did the unthinkable. The courtroom air was dense, heavy with expectation and judgment. Ilara felt it like a suffocating cloak, every gaze, every whisper, a needle piercing her already fragile hope. Sitting at the defense table between her lawyer, Dr. Mendez, and the cold reality of her situation, she seemed even smaller, more vulnerable. Her eyes, once filled with resigned sweetness, now carried the fury and despair of a cornered soul. The prosecutor, Dr. Carvalho, a man with a booming voice and imposing presence, walked through the hall, building his narrative with calculated coldness. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, gesturing dramatically towards Ilara, "here we have a tragedy, the death of a good man, Elias, by a poison that defied science, a silent poison, administered slowly and methodically. And who else, if not the only person with constant and unrestricted access, the caregiver, the granddaughter? Ilara?" He paused to let his words reverberate. "The defense will argue lack of motive, a granddaughter's love for her grandfather. But facts are stubborn, no forced entry, no pre-existing illness, only an inexplicable death and the constant presence of the accused. And regrettably, her inability to defend herself, to give us a coherent explanation, only reinforces the cloud of suspicion hanging over her." Ilara gripped her hands under the table, her nails digging into her palms. The prosecutor's words were like hammer blows to her head, each one sealing her fate. She wanted to scream, wanted to tear her throat so that her voice, however hoarse and weak, could proclaim her innocence. But silence was her jailer. Dr. Mendez, a middle-aged man with a tired expression, tried to intervene, but the judge restrained him, allowing the prosecutor to continue his relentless argument. "We now call the forensic expert Dr. Silva," the prosecutor announced. Dr. Silva, a man with thin glasses and a monotonous voice, ascended the stand. He presented a series of photographs and reports, detailing the absence of conventional evidence and the medical team's perplexity. "We found no traces of common poisons," he explained, "nor signs of trauma. The death was due to progressive organ failure, but the root cause remained a mystery." Next, an evidence table was pushed to the center of the courtroom. On it rested objects from Elias's house, the teacup Ilara prepared, her grandfather's medicine box, and notably a small ceramic pot with a cork lid, containing what appeared to be dried herbs, labeled in old handwriting. "Sleep tea, Elias." "This pot," Dr. Silva continued, "was found on the deceased's bedside table. We believe its contents were regularly used by Mr. Elias." At that exact moment, a loud, piercing caw echoed through the hall. All eyes turned to the high courtroom window, from where Corvus, Ilara's raven, burst in, flapping his wings with surprising force. He didn't stop, flying directly to the evidence table, landing with a dry thud next to the ceramic pot. A murmur of astonishment swept through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order. "What is that animal? Get it out of here!" But Corvus didn't move, his black, piercing eyes fixed on the herb pot. With a quick and precise movement of his beak, he pushed off the cork lid, which fell to the floor with a small click. Then he plunged his beak into the pot, not to eat, but to rummage. With impressive agility, he pulled out a dried leaf of a slightly different shade from the others and tossed it onto the courtroom floor. Then, with an even sharper caw and a furious flapping of wings, he began to peck at the leaf with an intensity bordering on violence, as if attacking a mortal enemy. Silence reigned again, but this time it was a silence charged with a new and strange understanding. Ilara, wide-eyed, watched Corvus. She knew. She had always known he was special. Dr. Silva, the forensic expert, approached the leaf Corvus had singled out. He bent down, picked it up with tweezers, and examined it closely. His expression, previously monotonous, transformed into one of shock and recognition. "Judge," he said, his voice now choked with surprise, This is not a common tea herb. This is a foxglove leaf, Digitalis purpurea. In controlled doses, it's a heart medication, but in excess, or administered slowly, it's a potent and insidious poison, capable of causing progressive heart failure without leaving obvious traces in routine toxicological tests. A buzz of voices erupted again, louder and more urgent this time. The prosecutor, pale, looked at the herb pot, then at Ilara, then at Corvus, who was now perched on the pot, observing the leaf on the floor with fierce vigilance. Ilara's silent scream had finally found its voice, not in words, but in the black feathers and intelligent eyes of her faithful friend. The truth, hidden in the shadows of a teapot, began to emerge, brought to light by a raven. Ilara's innocence, once a whisper in the void, now echoed in the courtroom, clear and undeniable. The game had changed. The buzz of voices erupted again, louder and more urgent this time. The prosecutor, Dr. Carvalho, pale, looked at the herb pot, then at Ilara, then at Corvus, who was now perched on the pot, observing the leaf on the floor with fierce vigilance. The game had changed. The judge, a man of austere demeanor who rarely showed surprise, banged his gavel with a force that made the echo reverberate. "Order, order in this court! Dr. Silva, please repeat what you said." Dr. Silva, still visibly shaken, but with a new energy in his voice, pointed to the leaf he held with the tweezers. "Your Honor, this leaf is unequivocally Digitalis purpurea, foxglove. Its cardiac glycosides are extremely potent. In therapeutic doses, it's a vital medication, but administered in small, continuous amounts, it can cause progressive heart failure, mimicking a natural death, and being extremely difficult to detect in routine toxicological tests, especially if the dosage is subtle and prolonged." A tense silence hung over the courtroom, different from the silence of judgment before. It was a silence of shock, of re-evaluation. The jurors, previously impassive, now leaned forward, their eyes fixed on the herb pot and the raven. Prosecutor Carvalho, recovering from the initial shock, tried to intervene. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the intervention of a wild animal, however, peculiar it may be, cannot be considered valid forensic evidence. We don't know where this leaf came from, how it got there, or if the animal didn't bring it from outside." Dr. Mendez, Ilara's defense lawyer, who until then seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, rose with new determination. "Excuse me, Your Honor. Dr. Silva, a respected forensic expert, has just identified the substance. The question now is not the origin of the leaf, but the presence of a potent poison in the tea Mr. Elias regularly consumed. And more importantly, the accusation against my client was based on the assumption that she would be the only one with access and motive. This evidence changes everything." Ilara, seated, felt tears stream freely down her face, but this time they were tears of overwhelming relief. She looked at Corvus, who stared back at her with his black, intelligent eyes, as if saying, "I told you so." It was a moment of deep connection, a promise fulfilled. The judge banged his gavel again. "The court recognizes the gravity of this new information. Dr. Silva, I request that the remaining contents of the pot be immediately submitted for a full toxicological analysis with a specific focus on cardiac glycosides, and the leaf in question must be preserved as crucial evidence." He then turned to the prosecutor. "Dr. Carvalho, the basis of your accusation against Miss Ilara, which rested on the absence of an identifiable cause of death and the exclusive presence of the accused, has just been fundamentally altered. The presence of digitalis in the deceased's tea opens a new and urgent line of investigation." The prosecutor swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor, understood." His tone was noticeably lower, his confidence shaken. "Given the extraordinary circumstances," the judge continued, his voice serious, "and the introduction of such significant and unexpected evidence, I declare this trial suspended. Miss Ilara will be released on bail, and a new investigation will be opened to determine how digitalis got into Mr. Elias's tea and who was responsible for its administration. A murmur of astonishment and relief swept through the courtroom. Ilara could hardly believe it. She was free, at least for now. Dr. Mendez leaned towards her, a tired but genuine smile on his face. "You're free, Ilara. For now, the game really has changed." Corvus, as if understanding every word, let out a soft caw, flew from the ceramic pot and landed on Ilara's shoulder, rubbing his head against her cheek. The courtroom watched in silence, witnesses to a feathered miracle. The truth, once imprisoned in Ilara's silence, now flew free, paving the way for a new and complex search for justice. The question was no longer if Elias had been poisoned, but who had done it and why. And the answer, Ilara knew, would be much darker than anyone could imagine. Ilara felt the weight of invisible shackles dissipate as the judge uttered his final words. The murmur that filled the courtroom was one of surprise, not condemnation, and that was a sweet melody to her ears. Corvus, still on her shoulder, cawed softly as a reminder that freedom was not a gift, but an achievement. Forged in the courage of a small, feathered heart, Dr. Mendez, visibly exhausted, but with a gleam of triumph in his eyes, helped her to her feet. "Come on, Ilara. There's a lot of bureaucracy ahead, but you're free." As they left the courtroom, they were met by a small crowd of reporters and onlookers. Camera flashes exploded and microphones were thrust in her direction. Ilara, accustomed to the forced silence of her condition, felt overwhelmed by the noise and attention. She squeezed Dr. Mendez's hand, seeking support. Corvus, sensing her distress, flapped his wings, emitting a loud, authoritative caw that made some reporters recoil. "No statements at this time," Dr. Mendez announced, his voice firm, protecting her. "My client has been released on bail. The investigation is ongoing. I ask that you respect her privacy." They hurried to a waiting car, a welcome relief from the media circus. Inside the vehicle, the silence was a balm. Ilara looked out the window, watching the world pass by, a world she thought she would never see again as a free woman. Corvus hopped onto the seat beside her, nestling comfortably. "You were incredible, Corvus," she whispered, stroking his feathers. The raven tilted his head, his black eyes fixed on her, an almost human intelligence shining in them. In Dr. Mendez's office, the atmosphere was one of cautious celebration. He poured her a glass of water and sat across from her, his expression serious again. "Ilara, this is a monumental victory, but it's only the beginning," he explained. "Prosecutor Carvalho is under pressure. His reputation has been shaken. They'll want to find the true culprit, and fast. This means the investigation will be intense." Ilara nodded, understanding. She still couldn't speak, but her mind was in a whirlwind. "The police will reopen the case with a new perspective," Dr. Mendez continued. "They'll focus on who had access to Elias's tea and, more importantly, who had knowledge of Digitalis and a motive to use it. People who were previously beyond suspicion will now be examined." He paused, observing Ilara's reaction. "Do you have any ideas, Ilara? Anyone you suspect? Anyone Elias might have angered, or who would benefit from his death?" Ilara closed her eyes, images of Elias and the people around him flashing through her mind. Elias was a complex man, with many dealings and consequently many potential enemies, but there was one person in particular who had always bothered her, a persistent shadow on the periphery of Elias's life. She took a notepad and a pen that Dr. Mendez offered her. With trembling hands, she wrote, "Elias's sister, Sophia." Dr. Mendez frowned. Sophia? She always seemed so devoted to her brother, at least in public. But it's true she inherited a significant portion of his fortune, didn't she? Ilara nodded vigorously, writing more. She always wanted control of the businesses. Elias never fully trusted her, and she was a retired nurse. She knew about herbs. A shiver ran down Ilara's spine. The idea of Sophia, the woman who had comforted her after Elias's death, being the culprit was disturbing, but it made sense. Sophia had always been excessively attentive to Elias, preparing his herbal teas for his health. Ilara remembered Sophia insisting that Elias drink the tea, even when he complained about the bitter taste, saying it was for his own good. Dr. Mendez took the notepad. This is crucial information, Ilara. The police will certainly investigate this, but you need to be prepared. The truth can be ugly. Corvus, who was observing the interaction intently, let out a low caw, like a warning. I know, Ilara wrote, her eyes fixed on the window where the sun was beginning to set. Freedom was sweet, but the search for true justice was only beginning. And she knew the path would be arduous and full of painful revelations. Sophia's shadow loomed over her, a new and terrible threat. The question who had been partially answered by Corvus. Now, the question why began to unfold, revealing a labyrinth of family secrets and greed. Ilara, with Corvus by her side, was ready to face whatever came. Ilara felt a knot in her stomach, seeing Sophia's name written in her own hand. It was a silent yet powerful accusation against someone she had considered a friend, or at least an ally in her grief. Dr. Mendez, notepad in hand, seemed to ponder the gravity of the information. Sophia, he repeated almost to himself, a retired nurse with knowledge of herbs and a substantial financial motive. This completely changes the suspect's profile. The police need to know this immediately. He stood up, renewed energy in his movements. I'll contact the detective in charge of Elias's case. They'll have to re-evaluate everything, and you, Ilara, need to rest. But be aware that this new phase will be even more exhausting. They'll want to hear your version, even in writing, and perhaps even confront Sophia. Her throat tightened. The idea of confronting Sophia, of seeing the mask fall, was terrifying. Corvus, sensing her tension, flew from her shoulder to the table, gently pecking the pen she had used. It was a gesture of comfort, a reminder that she was not alone. Dr. Mendez arranged a car to take her back home. A small country house Elias had left her, away from the city and its bustle. The journey was silent, punctuated only by the rustle of Corvus's wings, who settled comfortably on the passenger seat beside her. Ilara watched the rural landscape, the trees and fields that seemed so indifferent to the storm brewing in her life. Upon arriving, the house seemed emptier than ever, but also safer. She turned on the lights, and the familiar warmth of home enveloped her. Corvus flew to the improvised perch Ilara had made for him near the window, observing the twilight. Ilara prepared a chamomile tea, her hands still trembling slightly. She sat at the kitchen table, hot steam rising from her cup. Memories of Elias and Sophia began to unfold in her mind, now under a disturbing light. She remembered Sophia's visits after Elias's death, the words of comfort, the tight hugs. He was everything to us, Ilara, Sophia had said with tear-filled eyes. You were his light in his last years. Ilara, in her grief, had believed in Sophia's sincerity. But now, every gesture, every word was re-examined. Sophia's insistence that Elias drink the tea for his heart, even when he complained about the bitter taste. It's good for you, brother. Trust me, I know what I'm doing, Sophia would say with a gentle smile. Elias, always trusting his sister, would drink it. Ilara, who couldn't speak, couldn't intervene, nor express her own concerns about Elias's health. She felt helpless, and now guilty for not having realized it sooner. A solitary tear streamed down Ilara's face. The betrayal was a slower, more insidious poison than digitalis. The idea that Sophia, Elias's sister, the person who should have protected him, was responsible for his death, was devastating. Corvus, as if sensing her anguish, flew from his perch and landed gently on her shoulder. He rubbed his head against her cheek, a comforting warmth amidst the coldness of the revelation. Ilara hugged him with one hand, seeking solace. She knew the police would act quickly. Sophia would be questioned, and the truth would come to light. But the price of that truth would be high. Elias's family would be torn apart, and the image of the man she loved would be stained by an unimaginable betrayal. Night fell completely, and the darkness outside seemed to mirror the darkness that had settled in her heart. Ilara picked up the notepad again. "I need to be strong," she wrote, the pen scratching against the paper. "For Elias, and for myself." Freedom was just the first step. True justice would require courage to unearth secrets and confront the darkest face of human greed. And Ilara, with Corvus by her side, was ready. The battle had only just begun. The next morning brought with it a cold and merciless light, seeping through the gaps in the country house curtains. Ilara woke with a start, Sophia's name still echoing in her mind like a funeral bell. The chamomile teacup, now cold, sat on the bedside table, a silent reminder of the sleepless night. Corvus, who had spent the night on his perch, flew to the edge of the bed, gently pecking the sheet as if calling her back to reality. She got up, feeling her body heavy, but her mind strangely alert. The decision to face the truth, however painful, had brought a dark clarity. As she prepared coffee, the phone rang, making her jump. It was Dr. Mendez. "Ilara, good morning." His voice sounded grave, but with a tone of urgency. The police acted quickly. "Detective Silva, in charge of Elias's case, called me. He's on his way to your house. He wants to hear everything you have to say." Ilara nodded, even though she knew he couldn't see her. She picked up the notepad and wrote, "I'm ready." "All right, he should arrive in about an hour. Stay calm. Remember, you're not alone in this anymore." The call ended, and Ilara felt a shiver. The hour of truth was approaching. She sat at the kitchen table, Corvus perched on her shoulder, and began to organize her thoughts, reviewing every detail, every memory of Sophia and Elias. The insistence on the tea, the bitter taste, Elias's progressive symptoms. Everything now fit into a macabre pattern. Exactly an hour later, an unmarked car pulled up to the entrance of the small property. A tall, serious-faced man with piercing eyes exited the vehicle. He introduced himself as Detective Silva. "Good morning, Ms. Ilara," he said, his voice professional and direct. "Dr. Mendez informed me about the new evidence. Thank you for receiving me." Ilara led him to the living room, indicating the sofa. Corvus flew to his perch near the window, observing the scene with his peculiar intelligence. Ilara picked up her notepad and pen. "Dr. Mendez mentioned you have crucial information regarding Mr. Elias's death," the detective began, taking out a small recorder and placing it on the coffee table. "Please write down everything you can. Start from the beginning if that's easier." Ilara took a deep breath and began to write, her handwriting firm despite the tension. She described Elias's relationship with Sophia, the sister he trusted so much. She detailed Sophia's visits, how she always prepared tea for Elias's heart, and her insistence that he drink it, even when he expressed discomfort with the taste. She mentioned Sophia's background as a retired nurse and her knowledge of herbs. Finally, she wrote about the discovery of the financial motive, Sophia's secret debt to Elias, which Corvus had revealed. Detective Silva read each sentence carefully, his face impassive. He asked some questions, which Ilara answered in writing, elaborating on Elias's symptoms, the progression of the illness, and how Corvus had acted in court, pointing to the digitalis plant. "So, you're suggesting that Sophia, the victim's sister, poisoned Elias with digitalis using a tea because of a debt?" the detective asked, his voice laden with skepticism, but also with growing curiosity. "It's a serious accusation, Ms. Ilara. We need concrete proof." Ilara wrote, "The proof is in Elias's body." in Sophia's financial records, and in my memories. And Corvus, he knows. She looked at the raven, who cawed softly in response, as if confirming her words. The detective observed Corvus for a moment, a glint of intrigue in his eyes. I understand. The raven's story in court was unusual. But we need more than that. We need a confession, or forensic evidence that directly links Sophia to the poison and the tea. She always prepared the tea. No one else did, Ilara wrote, emphasizing the exclusivity. Elias trusted her blindly. Detective Silva nodded slowly. I understand. This is a good starting point. I will initiate a formal investigation into Sophia. We will check her and Elias's financial records and bank accounts. We will also re-examine the medical and toxicological reports, looking for any indication of digitalis that might have been overlooked or misinterpreted. He stood up. Ms. Ilara, your courage in bringing this to light is remarkable. Be prepared. Confronting Sophia will be delicate. She is the victim's sister, and the community sees her as a grieving figure. Delicacy was the least of her problems. The truth, however brutal, needed to come to light. She wrote her last sentence for the detective. I just want justice for Elias. Detective Silva put away the recorder and his notes. We'll do our best, Ms. Ilara. We'll be in touch soon. He said goodbye and left, leaving Ilara and Corvus alone again in the quiet house. The peace Ilara felt was fragile, almost illusory. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The next step would be the hardest. Seeing Sophia, the woman she had comforted and who had comforted her, be confronted with the truth of her own betrayal. Corvus flew from his perch and landed on her shoulder, his familiar weight a constant reminder that, no matter how dark the path became, she would not be alone. Justice for Elias would require her to face the darkness head-on. The door closed with a soft click, and the silence that followed in the country house was heavier than ever. Ilara remained seated on the sofa, the notepad still in her hands, Detective Silva's words echoing in her mind. It's a serious accusation, Ms. Ilara. We need concrete proof. And, later, confronting Sophia will be delicate. Delicate. The word seemed a cruel euphemism for the approaching storm. Sophia, the woman Ilara had embraced in her grief, whom Elias had blindly trusted, was now the target of a murder investigation. The idea was nauseating, but the truth, revealed by Corvus and confirmed by her own memories, was undeniable. Corvus, as always, sensed the change in atmosphere. He flew from his perch and landed on the back of the sofa, gently pecking Ilara's hair, a gesture of affection that brought her back to reality. She caressed him, seeking the familiarity and comfort he always offered. The solitude of the house, once a refuge, now seemed a space of agonizing waiting. The hours dragged on. Ilara tried to busy herself, but her mind was in a whirlwind. Every creak of the house, every leaf rustling against the window, made her jump, imagining it was the phone ringing or a car approaching. She prepared a light lunch, but couldn't eat more than a few bites. Anxiety was a tight knot in her stomach. In the late afternoon, the phone rang, making her jump. It was Dr. Mendez. Ilara, the police acted. His voice was tense, but there was a tone of confirmation. Detective Silva called me. They went to Sophia's house. She's being taken to the police station for questioning. Ilara felt a shiver run down her spine. She picked up the notepad and wrote, "Did she confess?" "No, not yet," Dr. Mendez replied, his voice lower. "She's in shock, vehemently denying everything. She says it's absurd, that you're delirious with grief." But Detective Silva found some things. The financial records confirmed the substantial debt she had with Elias. And, more disturbingly, they found a small garden in her backyard with some digitalis plants. Ilara closed her eyes, a wave of nausea hitting her. Digitalis, the silent, deadly proof. Sophia's coldness, Her ability to maintain the facade of a loving sister while cultivating the poison was terrifying. She wrote, "She knew about herbs. She was a nurse." Exactly. This only strengthens the suspicion. Detective Silva said the interrogation would be long. They will press her with the evidence you provided and what they found. He also asked you to prepare yourself. It's possible that, at some point, they'll want you to be present, even if only to corroborate details in writing to see her reaction. The idea of seeing Sophia, of being in the same room as the woman who had taken Elias from her, made Ilara's heart pound. Anger and pain mingled in a bitter confusion. She wrote, "I'll be ready. Be brave, Ilara. You're doing the right thing. Elias deserves justice." The call ended, and Ilara felt a weight on her chest. Justice was in motion, but the path would be winding and painful. Corvus, sensing her distress, flew to her shoulder and rubbed his head against her cheek again. He was her anchor, her silent witness. Night fell, bringing with it darkness and uncertainty. Ilara lit the fireplace, seeking warmth and light. She knew that Sophia, in her denial, would try to turn the situation against her, perhaps even questioning her sanity or the Raven's story. But Ilara was no longer alone, nor helpless. She had the truth, and Corvus, by her side, was living proof that truth, however unbelievable, would always find a way to surface. The legal battle for Ilara's freedom was over, but the war for Elias's justice was just beginning, and Ilara, with a strength she never knew she possessed, was ready to face whatever came. The image of Sophia, with her gentle smile and tear-filled eyes, now transformed into the cold face of betrayal. And Ilara knew she would need all her resilience to endure what was to come. The night dragged on like a heavy shadow over the country house. Ilara couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Sophia's face, sometimes with the compassionate smile Elias loved so much, sometimes with the calculating coldness of someone cultivating death in her own garden. Digitalis. The word echoed in her mind, a silent poison that had stolen her love and almost condemned her. Corvus, sensing his guardian's agitation, remained perched on the headboard of the bed, his intelligent gaze fixed on her, a constant and comforting presence in the darkness. At dawn, the pale sun barely managed to penetrate the curtains. Ilara got up, feeling her body heavy, but her mind strangely lucid. The night's anxiety had transformed into a cold determination. Elias deserved justice, and she would be the instrument to achieve it. Corvus flew to her shoulder as she moved through the kitchen, preparing a calming herbal tea that she could barely swallow. The silence of the house, once a refuge, now seemed to amplify the tension vibrating in her chest. Around 10 in the morning, the phone rang again, making her jump. It was Detective Silva. "Ms. Ilara, good morning." His voice was formal, but there was an underlying urgency. "Sophia continues to deny everything, but the evidence is overwhelming. The financial records, the digitalis plants. And we found some botany and pharmacology books in her house with notes on toxicity and dosage." Ilara felt a knot in her throat. She picked up the notepad and wrote, "Is she alone?" "Yes, for now." She requested a lawyer, of course. "But what I wanted to discuss with you is this. We'd like you to come to the police station, not for a formal statement at first, but your presence could be crucial. We want her to see that you are here, that you are not alone, and that the Raven's story, well, that the truth has come to light. Sometimes the presence of the victim or someone close can break denial. The idea of seeing Sophia again, of being in the same room as the woman who had planned Elias's death, made Ilara's stomach churn, but determination overcame fear. She wrote, "I'll be there." "When?" "If you can come in an hour, that would be ideal. We're at the time limit to hold her without formal charges, and we need anything that can help us get a confession or more details." All right, Ilara wrote, her hand firm. I'm on my way. The call ended. Ilara looked at Corvus, who watched her with his dark, piercing eyes. I need to go, my friend, she whispered, stroking his feathers. You need to stay here. It's not a place for you. She knew that Corvus's presence at the police station would be, at the very least, a distraction, and at worst could be used against her, reinforcing the idea that she was delirious. The Raven's truth was for the courtroom, for the final moment. Corvus gently pecked her finger, as if understanding. He flew to his perch, watching her as she prepared. Ilara put on simple but tidy clothes. She tried to fix her hair, but her hands trembled slightly. She picked up her bag, the notepad, and a pen. Before leaving, she knelt before Corvus. Wait for me. I'll be back. He tilted his head, and she felt a wave of strength emanating from him. The trip to the police station was a blur of thoughts. The familiar landscape seemed strange, as if the world had changed color. She mentally reviewed the last few months, every gesture from Sophia, every word from Elias. The pain of loss mingled with the anger of betrayal. How could someone be so cruel, so deceitful? Upon arriving at the police station, the atmosphere was cold and impersonal. The smell of old paper and bitter coffee hung in the air. A young officer directed her to a small, windowless waiting room. Detective Silva appeared a few minutes later, his face tired but his eyes steady. Thank you for coming, Ms. Ilara, he said, closing the door behind him. Sophia is in interrogation room 3. She's unyielding. Her lawyer is with her, of course. What we'll do is this. We'll take you to an adjacent room with a one-way mirror. You'll be able to observe her reaction when we confront her with the latest evidence, and if necessary, we can ask you to enter the room. Are you ready for that? Ilara took a deep breath, feeling her heart pound in her chest. She nodded, her mute voice failing to form any sound. The image of Sophia, the sister she had mourned, the friend who had comforted her, was about to materialize before her, no longer as a ghost of memory, but as the cold face of betrayal. The war for Elias's justice was about to have its first direct confrontation. The observation room door closed with a soft click, but the sound echoed like thunder in Ilara's ears. The room was small, cold, with a metallic smell she associated with fear. In front of her, a large, dark mirror revealed the scene on the other side, the interrogation room, and there was Sophia. Ilara felt a shock. Sophia was sitting, hunched, shoulders slumped, hands clasped on the table. Her hair, usually impeccable, was slightly disheveled, and her eyes, once so full of false compassion, now seemed empty and frightened. Beside her, a lawyer in a grey suit spoke in a low voice, gesturing calmly. Across the table, Detective Silva and a female officer maintained serious postures, with open folders in front of them. The image of Sophia, so different from the woman she knew, should have brought satisfaction. But Ilara felt only a knot of anguish in her stomach. It was the face of betrayal, but also the face of a broken woman. Elias's pain, her own pain, everything mingled in a bitter confusion. Detective Silva approached the mirror, and Ilara realized he was speaking to her through a built-in microphone. She's denying every point, Ms. Ilara. She says it's a conspiracy, that you're acting out of grief and delusion, that the digitalis plants are for an ornamental garden, and that the books are from an old hobby. Ilara felt anger bubbling up. A hobby? A hobby that cost Elias his life. She clenched her fists, breathing deeply to control her emotion. We're going to start pressing, Detective Silva continued, his voice serious. He turned and went back to the interrogation table. Miss Sophia, he said, his voice clear and firm, we need to be frank. The evidence we have is very strong. The financial records show that Elias had discovered your debt and was about to take action. This creates a clear motive. Sophia raised her head, her eyes flashing. That's absurd. Elias was my brother. He would never do anything to harm me. And the debt, it was a loan, nothing more. I would have paid it back. With what money, Ms. Sophia? The officer questioned, her voice calm but piercing. Your bank statements show you were in a desperate financial situation. Sophia's lawyer intervened. My client has already explained that she was going through temporary difficulties. That's no motive for murder. Perhaps not in isolation, Detective Silva retorted. But what about the digitalis plants in your garden and the botany and pharmacology books, with your detailed notes on the plant's toxicity and dosage? He took an envelope and pulled out some photos, placing them on the table. The images showed the plants in Sophia's garden and pages from the books with markings and underlines. Sophia paled, her eyes fixed on the photos. For a moment she seemed to lose her voice. The lawyer picked up the photos, examining them with a worried expression. I like gardening, Sophia stammered, her voice trembling. And the books, they're old. I've had them for years. I never used any of that to hurt anyone. Ah, but you were a nurse, Miss Sophia, the officer insisted. You had medical knowledge. You knew exactly what you were doing. The digitalis poison is difficult to detect. It mimics symptoms of other heart diseases. It's the perfect weapon for a silent poisoning. Ilara felt a shiver. Sophia's calculating coldness, now exposed, was even more terrifying. She remembered the days of mourning, Sophia's hugs, the words of comfort, all a charade. Sophia began to cry, a cry that seemed forced at first, but soon became hysterical. I didn't do it. I loved Elias. Ilara is making all this up. She's crazy with grief. She has a crazy story about a raven. She's the only one who would benefit from Elias's death, not me. The accusation, though expected, hit Ilara like a punch. Detective Silva looked at the mirror, then at Sophia. Ms. Sophia, the raven's story, as you call it, is what led us to the truth. And Ms. Ilara is not alone. He gestured towards the interrogation room door. Ilara felt her heart pound. It was the moment. She took a deep breath, determination overcoming fear and nausea. The door opened and she entered the room. Silence fell like a stone. Sophia, with red eyes and a tear-stained face, raised her head. Her eyes widened as she saw Ilara standing there, silent, but with unshakable strength. The expression of shock and terror on Sophia's face was undeniable. The mask had completely fallen. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the undeniable truth that hung between the two women. The war for Elias's justice had found its turning point. Sophia choked, her voice caught in her throat as her eyes, now filled with genuine dread, fixed on Ilara. The lawyer tried to intervene, but Detective Silva stopped him with a gesture. The silence in the room was dense, heavy, broken only by Sophia's ragged breathing. Ilara, in her muteness, was a statue of accusation, her posture erect and her gaze firm, not with hatred, but with deep sadness and unshakable truth. No, it's not true, Sophia whispered, her voice almost inaudible, but her eyes couldn't tear away from Ilara's. You're scaring me. The female officer, who had been observing until then, spoke with a soft yet authoritative voice. Miss Sophia, there's nowhere left to run. Miss Ilara isn't here to scare you, but for you to see that the truth has come to light. Her raven, as you mocked, was the messenger. He showed us where to look, and we found everything. The plants, the books, the financial records, your debt to Elias. He was about to expose you. That's why, wasn't it? The officer's words hit Sophia like blows. She looked at the lawyer, who slowly shook his head, indicating that there was no longer any possible defense against the avalanche of evidence and Ilara's silent presence. Sophia's facade of denial, already cracked, shattered completely. A sob erupted from her chest, a raw, desperate sound. I didn't mean to, she cried, her hands covering her face, tears streaming between her fingers. He was going to destroy me. He was going to tell everyone about the debt, about the diversions I made to cover. I was going to lose everything, my reputation, my job. I was desperate. Ilara felt a chill down her spine. The confession, though expected, was a final blow. The woman she had loved as a sister who had shared her grief was her husband's killer. The pain of betrayal was almost unbearable. I just wanted him to give me more time, Sophia continued, her voice choked. But he was unyielding. He said I had to face the consequences. I saw no other way out. The digitalis. I knew it was hard to trace. I just wanted him to get sick, to give me time to sort things out. Detective Silva leaned forward, his expression serious. But you continued the dosage, Miss Sophia. For weeks. You knew what you were doing. You knew it was lethal. Sophia collapsed, her head falling onto the table, her shoulders trembling with uncontrollable sobs. I don't know. I panicked. I don't know what came over me. Ilara remained motionless, observing the broken woman. There was no triumph in her heart, only a profound exhaustion and overwhelming sadness. Justice for Elias was beginning to manifest, not with a cry of victory, but with the bitter lament of a painful truth. She had promised Elias she would find the truth, and with Corvus's help, she had delivered. But the cost was the destruction of a family and the revelation of darkness in the human heart. The path to court would still be long, but the first and most difficult battle had been won. Detective Silva signaled to the officer who approached Sophia. The lawyer, pale-faced, began to speak in a low voice with his client, who was merely sobbing. Ilara felt a tug on her arm. It was Detective Silva gesturing for her to leave. She nodded, her eyes still fixed on Sophia for one last moment. As she left the room, the air seemed lighter, but the weight in her chest remained. The image of Sophia, broken, mingled with memories of Elias, smiling, loving. Ilara knew that the path to court would still be long, and the pain of loss would never disappear. But the truth had been revealed. Corvus, her faithful companion, had been the beacon in the darkness, the voice she didn't have, the guardian of justice. She looked at the sky through a corridor window, imagining him flying free, his mission accomplished. The first and most difficult battle had been won. Now, it was up to Ilara to find a new kind of peace, a path to healing, carrying Elias's memory and gratitude for a raven that defied all expectations. The Keel. End.